Giants in the Earth. Are the Bible and other ancient sources to be believed? By AMARU PINKHAM. Were there really giants roaming the earth in ancient times as the famous biblical passage informs us? If we are to believe the books of the Bible that follow Genesis, tribes of giants were still inhabiting much of the Middle East even when the Israelites arrived in the Promised Land. In the Old Testament we are informed of the numerous ensuing battles between the Israelites and certain giant tribes known as the Anakim, Zuzim, Zamzummin, Emim, Avvim, ites, and Rephaim. The most famous giant was, of course, Goliath, but at only 11 feet tall, he was dwarfed by other neighboring giants, including the 16-foot-tall King Og of Bashan. Such exotic imagery of towering giants certainly makes for gripping biblical reading. However, if the Jewish text is to be accepted as more than simple fantasy, it needs to be corroborated by references to bands of ancient giants in the histories of other cultures around the globe. Apparently it is. Many cultures, including the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Hindus, some Native American tribes explicitly mention both giant ancestors and even entire giant races in their records. The Codices of the Aztecs, for example, divide time into 5 cycles or suns and claim that many thousands of years ago during the second sun a race of giants covered the earth. One Aztec codex currently on view in the Vatican Library states, "Before the Great Inundation, which took place 4,800 years after the creation of the world, the country of Anuwats, Mesoamerica, was inhabited by giants, and all who did not perish in the flood were turned into fishes, though one of the giants, surnamed Architect, went to Cholula and built an artificial hill in the form of a pyramid. The gods beheld it with wrath, for it was to reach to the clouds, so they hurled fire on the pyramid, and the work was discontinued." Similar to the Aztec accounting, the Egyptians also divide history into 5 successive cycles. According to Stephen Meller, author of The Land of Osiris and From Light into Darkness, 2 recent books which cover the teachings of the Egyptian elder Abd el-Hakim Oyan, the early Egyptians recognized 5 cycles or 5 stages of the sun known successively as Keper, Ra, Un, Aten, and Amen. Meller claims that these stages represent both stages of consciousness and epochs of human prehistory and history. Apparently the remains of some of the Egyptian giants that populated these early cycles are 15-foot-long sarcophagi in the Cairo Museum. Hakim estimated that the sarcophagi date back to 4 to 5000 BCE and once enclosed giant mummies of that period. A theme of cycles and ancient human giants also found its way into some of the historical scriptures of India, including the Puranas and Tantras, which allude to a series of 4 cycles of yugas. With each succeeding yuga the human race becomes half as tall as the preceding age and its lifespan is also cut in half. In the first Satya Yuga, the age of peace, the Tantras claim that humans existed in giant bodies 21 cubits tall. A cubit is approximately 18 inches in length, and could live as long as 100,000 years. But now, in the Kali Yuga, the last and spiritually darkest of the 4 cycles, human height is only 3½ cubits, and designed to last only 100 years. A similar scheme of 4 ages is found in the Greek records, which similarly have humans of the First and Golden Age standing the tallest and living the longest. Now, in the dark, materialistic Iron Age, we find ourselves a long way from the idealized Greek Golden Age when the gods, including the giant-sized titans, walked among men, and disease was completely absent within the human species. Unfortunately, like our treatment of the much perceived outdated wisdom of the ancients, many of us have currently chosen to disregard their cycles, preferring instead to let our archaeological discoveries of diminutive human skeletons define our ancient history. But recently, thanks to the investigative work of Atlantis Rising columnist Michael Cremo and his colleague Richard Thompson, authors of the groundbreaking Forbidden Archaeology, many of us are reconsidering the wisdom of the cycles. Advocates, the Hindu Yugas, Cremo and Thompson set out to prove the truth behind the early cycles, and after some meticulous digging through discarded and hidden documents they were able to compile a body of virtually ironclad evidence. According to them, the archaeology has consistently revealed anomalous artifacts, but they are always hidden from the public when they do not agree with the prevailing academic theory of evolution. Cremo and Thompson uncovered an insidious conspiracy that has gone unchecked for years, during which the Smithsonian Institute and similar organizations have, on numerous occasions, been called in to investigate extremely ancient or giant-sized artifacts only to have them mysteriously disappear. Following the lead of Cremo and Thompson, I have recently been involved in my own redemption of the ancient cycles, particularly in regards to our giant ancestors. Not surprisingly, I have discovered the existence of literally hundreds of misplaced and ignored discoveries of giants and giant bones over the past 500 years. Searching the testimonies of the classic historians, I have also found that eyewitness accounts of giants from authoritative historians of the past, references that ostensibly prove that the so-called mythical heroes of ancient times really did exist, have been conveniently excluded from most history texts. Here are a few examples. The Roman historian Plutarch wrote that when the Roman commander Quintus Sertorius arrived in Tingis, Tangier, Morocco, in about 81 BC, the people of Tingis showed him a great mound that they said contained the remains of the mythical Libyan giant Antaeus, who was averred to have fought Hercules. Sertorius ordered his soldiers to dig up the mound and discovered a gigantic skeleton inside that was supposedly 60 cubits or 85 feet long. Pliny, in his Natural History, wrote that he saw the remains of a giant whom he thought was the legendary Orion, the great god and hunter who is immortalized in the heavens by the constellation that bears his name. Another historian, the Greek Pausanias, states that he was privy to the existence of the tomb of Asterius, a son of the Cretan king Minos, as well as the tomb of Geryon, a legendary giant who had possessed wings. He also writes of having knowledge of the existence of the tomb of the giant warrior Hyllus, a son of the legendary Hercules. There was always a belief in our giant ancestors. Thus, even the ancients apparently had tangible evidence to back up their belief in their early giant ancestors. Even the early Catholic Christian fathers contributed to this belief system with their own eyewitness references to archaeological evidence. The authoritative church father St. Augustine, 354–430 CE, a professed maverick archaeologist, wrote about his own giant discovery. In City of God, after citing an abundance of giant skeletal remains that had been discovered around the Mediterranean before and during his lifetime, Augustine alludes to a discovery made near his home in Carthage. I myself, not alone but with several other people, found a human molar so immense that we estimated it was 100 times the dimension of our own teeth. I believe that molar belonged to some giant. Could the molar really have belonged to a human giant? Such a notion would have been heartily endorsed by another church father, Tertullian, who, a century before, sought to prove the biblical allusions to giants by citing the incidence of giant human remains regularly uncovered in and around Carthage, of which he had first-hand knowledge. His testimony regarding the Carthaginian giants was so believable that it was enough to silence the skepticism of the educated European classes for more than 1,000 years. That was, of course, until Darwin and his theory of human evolution made its dramatic entrance onto the world stage in the mid-1800s. A new scientific community then suddenly mobilized around Darwin, and it quickly became unfashionable and uninformed to believe that the ancestors of the human race were anything other than erect apes, albeit intelligent ones. Any scientist worth his salt risked both his reputation and pension by believing otherwise. But concurrent with Darwinists arose a new breed of esotericists ready to preserve the wisdom of the ancients and their cycles of giants. These esotericists were advocates of a series of 19th-century occult tomes, such as The Secret Doctrine, which repackaged the ancient ages and made them more palatable for the modern scholar. Thus, the 5 cycles of the past were now promulgated as the 5 root races of humanity, 2 of which, the Atlanteans and Lemurians, had been giant-sized. One of the outspoken students of these occult classics was an intrepid Dutch anatomist named Eugene Dubois, who eventually resolved to leave his home Holland for Asia in search of archaeological evidence to support the root race theory. During the ensuing years between 1886 to 1895, Dubois participated in numerous excavations on Sumatra and Java, two of the remaining islands of Lemuria, eventually discovering skeletal bones on Java that were estimated to be those of an 800,000-year-old man. Then, in 1941, some colossal bones of a Java man, called Meganthropus paleoevanicus, giant man of ancient Java, were discovered. This ancient colossus, which was said to have stood 10 to 12 feet in height, was eventually accepted into the scientific paradigm as a giant offshoot of the main line of human evolution. As it eventually turned out, other 19th-century esotericists were able to find evidence to support the theory of root races without even leaving Europe. Certain phenomenal discoveries of giants on the continent during the preceding 500 years suddenly came to light. It became known, for example, that giant skeletal remains had been discovered near the castle of Chaumont, France in 1613 that were 25 feet, 6 inches in length, and that a 23-foot human skeleton had been found in 1456 near a river in Valence, France. There was also the giant human skeleton found under an overturned oak tree in the canton of Lucerne in 1577 that was reported at the time to be 19 feet, 6 inches long, as well as the 1856 discovery of a miner who fell through a shaft hole in Italy. Of course, his skeleton was only 11 inches. The ancient giants of the Americas. The work of Cremo and Thompson has also succeeded in setting the academic community on their heels by revealing hidden archaeological evidence that confirms the existence of humans in the Americas virtually millions of years ago. In Forbidden Archaeology, the authors mention human bone remains found in Argentina that date to 1.5 million years ago, as well as deposits of stone tools in nearby sediment estimated to be 2 to 5 millions of years old. Thanks to them, it has now become fashionable to speak of ancestral giants in the Americas, again. I say again because American giants were known by even the first Europeans to set foot in the Western Hemisphere, beginning with adventurers like Magellan who sailed around the tip of South America and visited the Patagonia giants that averaged 7 to 10 feet in height. Then, as the European explorers moved across the face of the Americas, they not only found living evidence of giants but archaeological remnants of ancestral giants as well. When Pizarro and his invading Spanish conquistadors conquered the Inca Empire in the 16th century, they were informed by the native Incas of legendary colonies of giants that had once existed in their part of the world. In one Peruvian town called Carumas, they found that the townspeople regularly rolled up their skirts and pant legs at least 1 foot because they insisted on wearing clothing that would have perfectly fit their towering giant ancestors. As they moved through the Andes, the Spanish regularly heard stories of the giant fair-skinned Viracochas, ancestors of the Incas, and Garcilaso de la Vega, perhaps the greatest of the Spanish chroniclers, reported hearing the strange legend of ancient giants that had anciently arrived on the shores of Ecuador and were so enormously tall that ordinary men reached no higher than their knees. The skeletons of these giants were ostensibly discovered in 1560 around Manta, Peru, and then again in 1928, when their bones revealed them to have been 8 to 11 feet in height. A press release regarding the discovery of these bones was released in Nayarit, Mexico in 1929. It reported that Captains D.W. Page and F.W.D. Valda had discovered the bones of a race of giants in Ecuador which averaged over 10 feet in height. While Pizarro was conquering Peru, Cortés and his band of invaders were discovering abundant evidence of giants in Mexico. According to the testimonies of the Mexican elders, a race of giants had even survived in their country as recently as the 10th century. The 16th century missionary and historian, Fray Diego Duran, wrote that he was told that giants had roamed the countryside until the time of the Aztec tribes, who cruelly and systematically drove them over cliffs and exterminated them. Some bones of these ancient giants were even examined by a search party led by Hernando Cortés during their sojourn in that part of the Yucatan known as Tlaxcala. One of Cortés's men, Bernal Diaz, recorded what they were shown by the chiefs and elders of the region. To show us how big these giants had been, the chiefs brought out a leg bone which was very thick. I stood next to it and it was as tall as I am and I am of reasonable height. They showed us other big bones, mostly rotten and eaten away by the soil. We were all astonished by the sight of these bones and were certain that there must have once been giants in this land. According to the diaries of another Spanish adventurer, Diego de Ordaz, who arrived in Mexico just after the invasion of the conquistadors and also found evidence of giants, upon reaching the summit of Mount Popocatépetl he found a huge bone on display within a temple. States Ordaz of his discovery. I have preserved this bone, which measures from the neck to the kneecap 5 cubits, approximately 8 feet 4 inches. Its width is in proportion. Ordaz took the bone with him and it was eventually sent to the Pope in Rome. Most recently, the May 4, 1908 edition of the New York Times reported giant skeletons found in Mexico by Mr. Charles Clapp. The article stated, he found a cave containing some 200 skeletons of men each above 8 feet in height. The cave was evidently the burial place of a race of giants who preceded the Aztecs. Mr. Clapp arranged the bones of one of the skeletons and found the total length to be 8 feet 11 inches. The head measured 18 inches from front to back. Ancient giants of the United States. Some of the most remarkable discoveries of giants made by the invading Europeans occurred in the United States. At almost the same time Cortez and Pizarro were recording their giant discoveries, giant sightings were being made by European adventurers in the southern portion of the United States. As the party of Hernando de Soto traveled through what is now Alabama and Mississippi, for example, they encountered a tribe of giant Native Americans, 2 of whom, the chief and his son, measured at least 8 feet in height. When de Soto asked the giant chief, Tuscaloosa, to accompany him further north, it was found that even the largest of Spaniards' horses could hardly bear his weight and the ruler's feet dragged along the ground when the pack animal moved forward. A few years later, John Smith of Pocahontas fame had his own encounters with towering Native American giants. These Goliaths, known as the Susquehannock Indians, commonly grew to 6'6" or more and completely dwarfed the European colonists who at the time averaged 5'2" in height. It is documented that during the ensuing Dutch wars in Baltimore a war chief of the Susquehannock was around 7'6" tall. But even the towering Susquehannock Indians were dwarfed by a neighboring tribe of cat people who averaged 10 in height. They had earned their name from their voices, which sounded like a panther's scream when they talked. Eventually, European chroniclers wrote in their diaries that many of the original natives of North America had been giants. Then, during the 1800s, conclusive evidence of ancient tribes of giants was discovered when hundreds of burial mounds were opened in areas that had been settled by the Adena and Hopewell cultures, including the territories from Mississippi. One of the largest excavations of this period occurred in 1883 2 miles from Mondon, North Dakota, which, according to the ensuing report in Scientific American, was an area 100 acres in size dotted with burial mounds full of giant bones. Along with the giant skeletons was found beautiful pottery and jewelry, thus revealing an advanced civilization. 5 miles above Mondon, on the opposite side of the Missouri, more mounds and giant remains were also discovered. When the archaeologists asked an aged Native American man what his people knew of these mounds, he answered, "Me know nothing about them. They were here before the red man." Curiously, evidence pointing to an advanced civilization of giants was also excavated in 1858 in Toledo, Ohio. According to Toledo's Firelands Pioneer, 20 giant-sized and mummified bodies facing east and possessing jaws and teeth twice as large as modern man were found, and next to each sat a bowl with curiously wrought hieroglyphic figures. Unfortunately, misplaced or destroyed skeletal remains of giants became commonplace in the 19th century, which is why there is little or no evidence of them today. One example of this mismanagement or perhaps deception occurred in Sayre, Bradford County, Pennsylvania, where antiquarians found skeletons of humans measuring approximately 7 feet tall with horns protruding from their skulls, 2 inches above the eyebrows. The diggers, including 2 professors and a Pennsylvania state historian, turned their findings over to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia. Supposedly the bones were later reported to be misplaced, stolen or lost. Other important 19th century excavations of giants in the United States are almost beyond belief. For example, a giant skull and tracks belonging to humans 25 to 30 feet tall were discovered in a mound near Kansas City, Missouri in 1877. Another colossal discovery was made in 1829 in Chesterville, Ohio, when a mound was opened up by some men digging for material to use for building a hotel. The giant human skull the men found was quickly taken to the local physician for observation and then determined to be so incredibly large that it could easily fit over a normal human skull. Another peculiarity of the skull was that it possessed many more teeth than a modern human skull. Mark AMARU PINKHAM is the North American Grand Prior of the International Order of Gnostic Templars, which is a division of the Scottish Knight Templars. Mark is the author of 4 books about the ancient mysteries and leads pilgrimages to the world's power places. http://www.bodymindspiritjourneys.com and at http://www.bodymindspiritjourneys.com.